Even standing at the edge of death, Arthur Ashe looked composed. Witnesses remembered him as a gentleman, to the end, not a man defeated by AIDS, but someone taking his final breaths, hoping that others living with the virus would still find a way to live as if a cure were possible. Years later, another headline would echo the same terror. Rapper Eazy loses his battle with AIDS just days after revealing his diagnosis. Fame, power, and money can bend many things. They can shape narratives by time, even make the world forget who someone used to be. But illness does not bargain. Stage lights can hide the sweat. Makeup can blur the cracks behind a smile. What they cannot conceal is the moment when a body begins to betray its owner. There are diseases that slip in quietly through wild nights, through unprotected encounters, through moments of euphoria when consequence feels far away. They creep in day by day, turning pleasure into a delayed sentence. According to reports, those same diseases have silently destroyed the lives of some of the most visible black stars in the world. And the 15 stories opened in this file are about them. Well-known black figures who once stood in positions millions only dream about. They had names that filled arenas, influence that shaped culture, and the power to make crowds move with a word or a note. Then AIDS, gonorrhea, syphilis, HPV, and other sexually transmitted infections, along with their devastating complications, pulled them out of the spotlight in the cruelest ways imaginable. Arthur Robert Ashe Jr., tennis legend, undone by a medical mistake at the height of glory. Arthur Robert Ashe Jr. wasn't just a winner. He was an icon. His name sat at the very peak of world tennis, and his presence extended far beyond the baseline. Calm but piercing on court, Ashe used strategy like a blade, precise, intelligent, impossible to ignore. To many, he represented more than athletic skill. He was a symbol of disciplined dignity and a quiet, relentless kind of strength. To the public, his life looked neatly tied to glory, the roar of the crowd, the shine of trophies, the image of a man, eternally in control of the ball of the match of his own destiny. Almost no one suspected that behind that composed exterior, a different game had already begun. A game he never agreed to play. It started according to medical records on September 21, 1983. During his second heart bypass surgery at New York Hospital Cornell Medical Center, a unit of HIV-infected blood was reportedly transfused into his body. No alarm sounded. No one in the room knew. In that moment, a virus slipped quietly into the bloodstream of one of the most respected athletes on earth and began writing an entirely new script. The infection did not announce itself. It waited. For years, Ashe continued to appear in public with the same familiar composure. Suits pressed, voice steady, mind sharp. But beneath the surface, his immune system was being slowly dismantled. By 1988, the first cracks in that control could no longer be dismissed. Severe headaches drove him back to the hospital. In April of that year, brain surgery for toxoplasmosis forced doctors to run deeper tests. The result, when it came, changed everything HIV positive. From that moment forward, Ashe's life split into two timelines. The one the public saw the calm, deliberate advocate, still speaking about justice, race, and responsibility, and the one only his doctors and closest loved ones truly witnessed the relentless progression of disease. The virus moved without mercy. Over the following years, complications arrived like an unending chain. His immune system weakened step by painful step. In December 1992, he was admitted repeatedly for soaring fevers and a dry cough that refused to leave. Those who saw him in those days said the change was clear. His once lean athlete's frame wasted away. From approximately 165 pounds, his weight reportedly dropped below 120. Breathing, once controlled and measured from years of grueling matches, became a desperate effort. Blood oxygen levels fell. Each inhale needed help. In his final week, doctors had to use a ventilator just to keep his lungs moving. On February 6, 1993, In the same hospital where the story had begun a decade earlier, the ending arrived. At 3:13 p.m., Arthur Ashe's heart stopped. Cause of death: acute respiratory failure due to pneumocystis jirovecii pneumonia, a ruthless complication of end-stage AIDS. He was 49. The silence that followed was heavy, not just grief for a legend lost, but a chilling reminder that even at the height of fame, a single unseen error, one contaminated bag of blood, could rewrite a life. Kevin Peter Hall, the screen giant brought down by an infected transfusion. Kevin Peter Hall was the kind of figure you didn't forget once you'd seen him. Towering at 7'2", he filled any frame he stepped into. Hollywood cast him as aliens, monsters, forces of nature, but people who worked with him said his real power was not his size, it was his presence. Inside heavy prosthetics and suffocating costumes, Hall found a way to give non-human characters emotion. He made creatures feel alive. He turned faceless roles into something strangely human. Even if audiences rarely saw his bare face, the industry knew his name. He was changing what physical roles could mean. Then, in December 1990, everything veered off course. During filming in Los Angeles, Hall was involved in a major car accident. The impact tore into that enormous frame, leaving him critically injured. To save his life, doctors transfused blood fast, urgent, with no time for anything but survival. No one in that emergency room suspected that the blood being pumped into his veins might carry a death sentence. But according to later reports, those units were contaminated with HIV. 3 to 4 months later, the first signs began to surface. In March 1991, Hall was hospitalized with relentless high fevers spiking between 102 and 104 F. He coughed up blood. Every breath felt like someone tightening a fist around his lungs. His immune system collapsed at horrifying speed. His CD4 count reportedly dropped below 50 cells per microliter, a level that left his body almost defenseless. He was moved into isolation, cut off from casual contact, as if the man who had once stood tall beneath studio lights now needed protection from the world he once towered over. In his final days, it was a machine that did the breathing. An invasive ventilator forced air into lungs that no longer had the strength to work on their own. The giant people had known on screen wasted away in barely 10 days. Organs began to fail first, the lungs, then the systems that depended on them. Severe AIDS-related pneumonia triggered a chain reaction, irreversible respiratory failure, then septic shock, then multi-organ collapse. In the early hours of April 10, 1991, at Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center, Kevin Peter Hall took his last breath. He was 35. His death came too fast, too quietly for a man whose work had been all about occupying space. One moment he was the unseen engine inside Hollywood's most memorable creatures. The next he was gone, taken not by the roles that pushed his body to its limits, but by a virus that slipped into his blood under the guise of help. Gil Scott-Heron, a century's disease, gnaws away the rebel voice of an era. Gil Scott-Heron's name didn't just appear in music history. It echoed. He stood at the intersection of song, poetry, and politics, shaping a sound and a philosophy that would influence generations of hip-hop and spoken-word artists. He didn't merely entertain, he indicted. His work carried the rhythm of the streets, the weight of protest, and the sting of truths people preferred not to hear. On stage, he felt like a witness, someone standing at the edge of America's contradictions and reporting back in verse. But even as his voice rattled systems, his personal life spiraled into storms he could not outright. Starting in the 1980s, according to accounts from those around him, Scott-Heron fell deep into addiction, crack, heroin, whatever dulled the noise for a while. Needles were shared nights blurred together. Somewhere in that haze, HIV entered his bloodstream and stayed unannounced for years. For a long time there were no obvious signs. He still performed, still toured, still pushed his body to do what it had always done, step onto a stage and deliver. But by 2001, his body began signaling distress. Hospital visits for infections became frequent. Times that once would have been spent writing or performing were now spent under fluorescent lights hooked to IV lines. Each discharge sent him home weaker. The erosion was slow but relentless. A man who once commanded hours on stage without tiring could no longer rely on his own strength. From a frame that had hovered around 175 pounds, his weight reportedly dropped below 130. Clothes hung loose. Steps slowed. Breaths grew shorter. Still, he clung to music, returning to the studio and stage whenever his body allowed it, as if refusing to let the disease dictate his final chapter. In early 2011, he agreed to a European tour despite fragile health. Each performance came at a higher cost, draining what little reserve remained. When he returned to New York in late May, he was already running on fumes. On May 25, 2011, Gil Scott-Heron was admitted to St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center with a fever that climbed to 104 F, coughing up thick infected sputum. His blood oxygen levels plunged below 90%, recurrent pneumonia stacked on top of chronic HIV, pushing him into acute respiratory failure. Doctors tried non-invasive ventilator support, but his lungs had nothing left to give. His body, already depleted from years of illness and addiction, could not withstand the final assault. In the late afternoon of May 27, 2011, at 62 years old, Gil Scott-Heron died. The end was quiet, in stark contrast to a career built on making noise the world could not ignore. A virus that had lingered in his body for decades finally closed the mouth that once dared to speak what others wouldn't. Alvin Ailey Jr., the dance genius, slowly consumed from within. Alvin Ailey Jr. was not just a dancer. He was an architect of movement. As founder of the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, he carved a place for black modern dance on the world stage, turning bodies into living archives of history, pain, joy, and resistance. His choreography was emotional and unmistakably his own, rooted in black identity, spirituality, and the collective memory of a people. On stage, Ailey seemed untouchable, a man whose control over the human body, his own and others, appeared absolute. Every step was intentional, every gesture precise. But there was one thing he could not choreograph: what was happening inside his own body. According to later accounts, subtle signs began to appear around 1988. His hands trembled just slightly at first. His memory slipped for moments, then returned. There were flashes of confusion, lapses of control that didn't fit the image of the disciplined artist the world knew. Behind the scenes, it was said that a long ago sexually transmitted infection, syphilis, contracted decades earlier through unprotected intimacy and possibly shared needles, had quietly advanced to a third devastating stage. By November 1989, the truth could no longer be softened. Ailey was hospitalized in New York with violent seizures and rapidly worsening meningitis-like symptoms. Tests, including a strongly positive VDRL, suggested widespread neurosyphilis. The infection had reportedly reached his central nervous system. His decline was swift and merciless. Hemiplegia, paralysis on one side of the body, set in. His mind began disappearing into long, empty spaces. Heart function weakened. His ejection fraction fell below 40%, no longer strong enough to sustain the body that had once been the very definition of strength and discipline. In his final days, at Lenox Hill Hospital, Alvin Ailey lay still, the control he had once wielded over every muscle now completely gone. High-dose antibiotics were administered relentlessly, but the damage to his brain and nervous system was already too severe. Opportunistic infections hovered around his weakened body, finding openings where his defenses had collapsed. Consciousness slipped. Seizures returned. Heart rhythms became erratic. The man who had taught generations how to command the stage could no longer even command a heartbeat. In the early hours of December 1989, Alvin Ailey Jr. died at age 58. His death stood in brutal contrast to the image the world held of him, a body in motion, a mind in complete control. The same body that had been celebrated as a symbol of grace and power was gradually undone by a disease that, according to reports, had been simmering inside him for years. A quiet infection improperly treated had finally claimed the life of a legend. Rudy Ray Moore, the Dolomite legend taken by a cancer that had been quietly forming for years. Rudy Ray Moore was a name you couldn't avoid when talking about American pop culture during the blaxploitation boom. He wasn't just an actor. He was a comedian, a singer, a hustler in the truest sense, the man who wrote, produced, and embodied the outrageous character of Dolomite. With a raw, unfiltered performance style, he bulldozed through the limits of what black images on screen were supposed to look like. Success came late, but when it hit, it spread like a tidal wave. Moore built his own empire from the ground up, his work echoing years later in hip-hop stand-up comedy and independent film. He became an icon of living loudly and refusing to apologize. But behind the neon-colored posters and X-rated punchlines, another story was believed to be unfolding. According to later accounts, Moore's life in the 1970s, filled with travel adult film sets and a constant stream of casual unprotected sex, may have opened the door for HPV type 16, a virus known to be linked with certain cancers. For decades it reportedly lingered in his body, quiet and undetected. No dramatic symptoms. No siren warnings. Just a slow, invisible wearing down of the liver that would only reveal itself when it was already almost too late. By late 2007, the first medical alarms sounded. Imaging tests showed what was described as a large tumor in his liver nearly 3 inches across. Doctors concluded that hepatocellular carcinoma, a primary liver cancer, had formed and begun to spread. Moving into 2008, his health crashed. From July onward, Moore was in and out of hospitals. His skin turned a deep, unmistakable yellow. His abdomen swelled with a sights fluid pooling in his belly, reportedly reaching up to 2 to 5 gallons at its worst. The pain sharpened, drilling into his side and radiating outward. Acute kidney failure added weight to the collapse. Long-standing type 2 diabetes made every potential treatment more complicated, every intervention more fragile. His failing liver could no longer clear toxins. According to medical reports, his bilirubin climbed above 20 meg/dL, signaling a body drowning in its own chemistry. Organs began dropping away one by one. Consciousness flickered. Hepatic comas came and went, each one a reminder that the end was no longer a distant threat, but a ticking clock. On October 19, 2008, at a long-term care facility in Akron, Ohio, Rudy Ray Moore took his final breath at age 81. Acute liver failure closed the life of a man who had once treated limits like a joke. The exit was slow, brutal, and merciless, the underside of a lifestyle that had seemed glamorous at the time, but may have carried a cost no one imagined when the party started. Sylvester James Jr. Disco's shining voice silenced by AID. Sylvester James Jr. didn't just sing over disco tracks. He redefined what a voice could be in that era. High, soaring, unapologetically bold, his sound cut straight through the safest parts of mainstream music. His performances shattered molds, gender norms, stage expectations, fashion rules. With sequins, falsetto, and fearless presence, Sylvester brought non-binary imagery and a liberated spirit into rooms that had never seen anything like him. His hits dominated dance floors. He became an icon, not only for music fans, but for queer communities who saw in him a mirror they had never had before. Behind the lights, though, a different fight would take shape. From the 1970s disco scene, a world of close quarters, late nights, and unprotected intimacy, HIV is believed to have entered his life. For years it stayed quiet. Sylvester kept recording, kept performing, kept moving, as if nothing could slow him down. By 1986, the virus began to show its hand. According to reports, he was hospitalized with lesions on his legs, Kaposi's sarcoma, small but persistent signaling that his immune system was no longer holding the line. Treatments began. Hospital visits became routine. But the disease moved faster than anyone hoped. In 1988, everything sped up. Sylvester endured constant high fevers, his temperature swinging between 102 and 104 F. The coughs deepened. His breaths became shallow, rapid, each inhale a negotiation. Tests reportedly showed a CD4 count below 50 cells per microliter. His defenses had almost vanished. Multiple admissions to San Francisco General Hospital followed. Blood oxygen levels dipped below 85%. Pneumocystis carinii, pneumonia, ravaged his lungs, while Kaposi's sarcoma spread across his skin, face, and neck. The man who once danced effortless hours on stage dropped from about 175 pounds to under 110 in a frighteningly short time. By the final days, his body was skin stretched over bone, his voice nearly gone. The respiratory failure had become irreversible. On December 16, 1988, in his San Francisco apartment, Sylvester James Jr. died at 41. It was a painful too early end for someone whose music had once made rooms feel immortal, a sharp reminder that even the most flamboyant, free-spirited life can be cut down by a virus that doesn't care who it inhabits or what they represent. Eazy-E gangster rap's pioneer gone in a matter of weeks. Eric Lynn Wright, better known as Eazy-E, didn't just ride the wave of gangster rap, he helped build it. As a founding member of N.W.A., he brought raw, unfiltered street stories into living rooms that had never heard anything like them. His nasal voice, defiant posture, and ruthless lyrics turned him into both a lightning rod and an icon. He helped shape a sound, a culture, an attitude. And then almost overnight he became something else, a cautionary tale. For years, Eazy-E lived the lifestyle that came with fame, multiple partners, unprotected sex nights, where consequences felt like a distant rumor. Somewhere in that blur, HIV entered his bloodstream and stayed there unspoken, undetected. On February 21, 1995, Eazy-E was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. He was coughing up blood. His fever climbed to 104 F. Each breath felt like drowning. 4 days later, on February 24, doctors delivered the diagnosis publicly: AIDS. The numbers behind that announcement were staggering. Reports indicated a CD4 count of just 14 cells per microliter, almost no immune system left. Severe pneumonia was tearing through his lungs, stripping away the organ's ability to move oxygen into his blood. By March 10, he was moved to intensive care and placed on an invasive ventilator. Acute respiratory distress syndrome dragged his blood oxygen below 70% despite maximum support. In the days that followed, it was as if his entire body declared surrender. Sepsis spread. Fluids built up. Kidneys failed. A man who had once stalked stages with brute energy now lay motionless under hospital lights, surrounded by tubes and machines. It took only 36 days from admission for the story to end. At 6:35 p.m. on March 26, 1995, Eric Lynn Wright died at age 30. He didn't collapse on stage or in a studio, but in an ICU bed with medicine, acknowledging its limits against a virus that had been given too many years to win. Howard Rollins' rare talent lost to a storm of infection. Howard Ellsworth Rollins Jr. was never a loud celebrity. He didn't need to be. His power lived in his craft. On screen and stage, his performances carried a depth that made people lean forward. He was the kind of actor other actors watched. He brought intensity and vulnerability to roles that might have felt ordinary in other hands. Critics saw him as someone with the potential to go much further if his personal storms hadn't collided with his body's quiet war. Behind the scenes, according to later accounts, years of drug use and risky behavior opened doors for infection. Shared needles and unprotected encounters are believed to have exposed him to Neisseria, gonorrhea. What began as an untreated sexually transmitted infection reportedly spread, slowly igniting chronic inflammation. In his joints pain, he often pushed aside. In November 1996, the simmering problem finally exploded. His body ignited with fevers hitting 106F. Joints swelled grotesquely. Knees filled with pus. Pain turned movement into agony. On November 25, 1996, Rowlands was admitted to St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital Center in critical condition. Tests showed white blood cell counts soaring to around 25 per cubic millimeter, a glaring sign of rampant systemic infection. Kidneys began failing. Creatinine levels climbed toward 5 mg/dL, suggesting the filtration system of his body was shutting down. He was rushed into intensive care, hooked up to IV drips of high-dose antibiotics. But the infection was already ahead. The bacteria, reportedly resistant and aggressive, spread to his lungs and brain. Seizures started. His awareness grew disordered, then dim. Widespread sepsis pushed him into acute multi-organ failure. At that point, medicine could only watch the collapse unfold. On the evening of December 8, 1996, just 2 weeks after his critical admission, Howard Ellsworth Rollins, Jr. died at age 46. There was no long farewell, no extended battle. The disease, neglected and underestimated for years, took everything in a final concentrated assault. William Jermaine Stewart, a global performer taken by a double attack. William Jermaine Stewart once moved across international stages with an energy that felt endless. He was known to music fans around the world as a performer who brought brightness, confidence, and an unmistakably modern presence to his shows. Tours were frequent, spotlights constant. He cultivated an image of freedom and forward motion, living boldly, dressing loudly, carrying himself like someone who had finally arrived. But even as he traveled, partied, and connected, a quiet threat was believed to be traveling with him. During tours through Europe, in the 1980s, sources claimed that unprotected same-sex relationships opened the door for HIV. The virus stayed silent for years. By 1995, the calm was over. He was first hospitalized with jaundice and dull, persistent pain in the upper right side of his abdomen. Tests showed severe liver damage, but the full danger was reportedly underestimated. Time did what time always does, it ran out. In January 1997, doctors confirmed primary liver cancer. A tumor about 4 inches in size had formed with signs of metastasis to the lungs. His CD4 count had dropped below 100 cells per microliter, marking end-stage AIDS. From February on, hospital stays stretched longer. Bilirubin levels rose above 15 mg/dL. His abdomen swelled with ascites. Breaths grew short. His body weight fell from around 165 pounds to under 120. Acute kidney failure entered the picture, with creatinine levels rising toward 4 mg/dL, signal that another system had joined the collapse. Each day, strength drained, consciousness dulled. Hepatic comas came and went. The combination of metastatic liver cancer and advanced AIDS formed a spiral that no treatment could fully break. On the morning of March 17, 1997, in Homewood, Illinois, William Jermaine Stewart died at age 39. A life once defined by international stages and relentless motion ended in a narrow hospital room, with the body finally demanding payment for years of unnoticed damage. Essex Hemphill, a radical voice cut down by a brutal cancer. Essex Hemphill was not a household name for everyone. But in certain circles, black queer art, underground poetry, performance spaces, his words were unavoidable. He wrote and spoke with a sharpness that didn't flinch. His poems and essays addressed identity, desire, and the daily conflicts of black gay life in America, with a candor many found electrifying and others found unsettling. He didn't chase mainstream fame. He became something else, instead a spiritual landmark, a reference point for those searching for language to describe themselves. By 1994, however, his own body had begun to tell a story he couldn't edit. Lesions in the anal area appeared first quietly, then persistently. Biopsies led to a diagnosis that carried its own terror: anal cancer, reportedly linked to HPV type 16. The virus, likely contracted during risky encounters in the 1980s art and club scenes, had stayed hidden until his immune system could no longer hold the line. The disease did not behave gently. By 1995, the tumor had spread to his lungs and liver. Coughs turned bloody. Breathlessness grew more severe, as if the air itself were turning against him. In October 1995, he was admitted to a Philadelphia hospital, blood oxygen levels below 80%, pain radiating from his pelvis with every movement. Within 6 months, he lost more than 45 pounds. His face grew hollow. His body, once a vessel for performance and presence, became a site of constant suffering. Doctors resorted to ventilator support as respiratory failure advanced, but his lungs, riddled with metastases, could no longer keep pace. Machines beeped. Monitors tracked numbers that dropped instead of climbing. On the afternoon of November 4, 1995, at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania, Essex, Hemphill died at age 38. His battle was short, intense, and merciless, the physical counterpart to a creative life spent refusing to back down from difficult truths. Willie Ninja ballroom royalty gone from a failing heart. William Roscoe Leake, known to the world as Willie Ninja, wasn't just a dancer. He was a movement. He took voguing from underground Harlem ballrooms and pushed it onto global stages, into fashion, into music videos, into the vocabulary of pop culture. Willie's lines were razor sharp, his demeanor cool. Every gesture felt choreographed to perfection. He became an icon of creativity, defiance, and precision, a symbol of how a subculture could redesign the mainstream without asking permission. But even as his influence spread, his body was being slowly dismantled by a virus many in his community knew intimately. From around 2004, his vision began to blur. Shapes warped at the edges. Colors lost clarity. Doctors later identified signs of cytomegalovirus retinitis, a condition often seen in advanced HIV. According to reports, the virus had likely entered his system years before through unprotected sex in the 1980s and 1990s ballroom scene. By 2006, hospitalizations stacked up. His heart rhythm grew erratic. Tests indicated his ejection fraction had fallen below 30%, a marker of severe cardiomyopathy. In August 2006, the situation turned critical. Acute pulmonary edema flooded his lungs. Breathing became a fight. Blood oxygen levels plunged. His CD4 count dropped below 50 cells per microliter, leaving his body exposed to opportunistic infections that multiplied without restraint. Limbs started to lose sensation. Paralysis crept into his lower body. Each day, strength bled away, despite treatments that now served more to delay the inevitable than reverse it. On September 2, 2006, at New York Presbyterian Hospital, acute heart failure ended the struggle. Willie Ninja died at age 45. It was a quiet exit for a man whose art had once made rooms gasp. His death stood as a stark reminder of how slowly and how completely an unchecked virus can dismantle even the strongest expressions of freedom. Melvin Lindsay, a beloved radio voice erased by infection and kidney failure. In Washington, D.C., Melvin Lindsay wasn't just a radio host. He was the voice. His shows shaped taste, introduced songs, and stitched together the soundtrack of a generation. His bold style, warmth, and uncanny ability to connect with listeners turned him into a local legend. For many, his voice was as familiar as a family member's. But as his career soared, his body was carrying a threat that almost no one knew about. By early 1992, his health took a terrifying turn. He developed high unrelenting fevers, climbing to 104 F, accompanied by severe back pain and bloody urine. At first, people close to him believed it might be stress or overwork. Others suspected something more serious. On March 10, 1992, Melvin Lindsay was admitted to Sibley Memorial Hospital. Tests showed blood creatinine over 8 mg/dl, evidence of severe kidney failure. White blood cell counts rose above 20 per cubic millimeter, a screaming indicator of systemic infection. Doctors eventually traced the crisis back to what was described as chronic, inadequately treated gonorrhea stretching back to the 1980s. Over years, the bacteria were believed to have gradually destroyed kidney filters, triggering diffuse glomerulonephritis and opening the door to widespread sepsis. He began near constant dialysis. His body swelled, limbs turned heavy. Breathing grew labored as the infection spread to his lungs, layering respiratory failure on top of catastrophic kidney damage. By the final days of March, his organs failed one after another. Kidneys essentially stopped functioning. Fluid filled his lungs. Oxygen dropped. His heart struggled under the strain. In the early morning of March 26, 1992, Melvin Lindsay went into complete multi-organ failure and died at age 36. The same voice that had once filled the city with music and laughter went silent in a hospital bed, leaving behind a community shocked at how quickly someone so present could disappear. Fela Kuti, Afrobeats architect, brought down by a relentless virus. Fela Kuti was more than a musician. He was a movement in human form. He birthed Afrobeat, a furious hypnotic blend of traditional African rhythms, jazz funk, and pointed political commentary. On stage, Fela did not just perform, he commanded. His shows were marathons of sound and protest, his lyrics cutting directly into corruption and oppression. He was loved, feared, harassed, celebrated. His life was a long confrontation with power and with his own impulses. Alongside his music and activism, Fela embraced an extreme lifestyle. Multiple partners. Public polygamy with over 24 wives. A philosophy that rejected restraint in almost every form. Somewhere in that tangle, HIV entered his body. For years, the virus reportedly went unaddressed. By 1996, the evidence was visible. Kaposi's sarcoma began appearing on his skin, dark lesions that spread slowly but relentlessly. His CD4 count fell below 200. The once indestructible image gave way to a man clearly visibly weakened. By 1997, the decline accelerated. From May onward, he was hospitalized repeatedly for irregular heartbeats, fluid in his lungs, and swelling throughout his body. Right-sided heart failure caused fluid to build up in his tissues. His weight surged from around 155 pounds to over 200, much of it water. Movement became a struggle. Each breath took effort. Opportunistic infections piled onto the sarcoma and advanced AIDS, pushing him into an inescapable spiral. On the evening of August 2, 1997, at his home in Lagos, Fela reportedly went into sudden cardiac arrest. There was no time for the hospital. No last-minute miracle. He died from acute heart failure at age 58. A man who had lived louder, wilder, and more defiantly than almost anyone of his era, had his life ended not by soldiers or censors, but by a virus that had been quietly dismantling him for years. Yvette Wilson, the TV favorite who never got a real chance to fight back. Yvette Wilson was a familiar face on American television. Audiences remembered her for her comic timing, quick wit, and an energy that made every scene feel more alive. She wasn't just a comedian, she had a presence that made people feel like they knew her personally. For years, she appeared steadily, building a reputation as a dependable, lovable, on-screen personality. In public, she looked healthy, vibrant, and strong. But inside her body, a slow-burning threat had been developing for far longer than anyone realized. According to reports, HPV type 18, a virus linked to cervical cancer, had been present in her system since the 1990s, passed on through unprotected sex. For years it remained undetected. By 2010, doctors diagnosed stage II cervical cancer. It was no longer confined to one place. Yvette began the fight: treatment, surgeries, procedures, all while trying to maintain her dignity and strength in public. For a while there was hope. Then in 2012 everything shifted. The cancer spread aggressively, first to her liver, then to her lungs and bones. Liver damage deepened, turning her skin and eyes a deep yellow. Abdominal pain became constant. Her body began to fail in pieces. Her weight fell from around 155 pounds to below 100 in a short time. Walking became difficult. Breathing demanded effort. In May 2012, she was admitted to a Los Angeles hospital as her condition deteriorated rapidly. Tests showed near total kidney failure with creatinine levels around 6 mg/dL. Metastasis to the lungs caused fluid buildup and respiratory distress. Dialysis became routine. Oxygen support was constant. Her body swelled with fluid yet remained weak, exhausted. Cancer had closed off nearly every escape route. On June 14, 2012, Yvette Wilson died at age 48. The end was heavy, painful, and unforgiving, a stark contrast to the laughter and light she had once brought into people's homes. Jessica Petway, the influencer whose misdiagnosis cost everything. Jessica Petway rose to prominence, not in stadiums or on TV, but on social media. She documented her life, motherhood, marriage, daily routines with a kind of candid warmth that drew people in. Her videos radiated positivity. She seemed to embody the idea of a young woman having it all: family, work, self-care, and a sense of control. To her followers, she was more than a content creator. She was proof that chaos could be turned into beauty, that struggle could be repackaged as inspiration. Behind the scenes, her body was sounding alarms no one fully heard. From 2022, Jessica began experiencing unusual pain and prolonged bleeding. Initial examinations, according to accounts, blamed fibroids, a diagnosis that turned out to be tragically incomplete. While doctors focused on that HPV type 16 continued to damage her cervix day after day. By July 2023, the truth emerged: stage II cervical cancer. No longer localized. The tumor had already begun spreading to bones and liver. From that point, the collapse accelerated. Vaginal bleeding intensified, leading to chronic anemia. In just 3 months, she reportedly received 18 blood transfusions simply to keep her alive. Hospitalizations blurred together. Bone pain became unbearable. Every step, every movement, a new layer of suffering. Liver function failed. Bilirubin rose to around 12 mg/dL. Her skin and eyes turned noticeably yellow. Over 8 months, she lost more than 55 pounds. Her body shrank while the disease grew. In the final weeks, aggressive treatment no longer offered realistic hope. Jessica transitioned to palliative home care, shifting the goal from survival to peace. No more invasive procedures, just pain management and the chance to say goodbye. On the evening of March 11, 2024, in her home in Georgia, multi-organ failure set in. Her heart, liver, and kidneys stopped responding one after another. Jessica Petway died at 36. It was a death wrapped not only in illness, but in the weight of medical missteps, delayed diagnosis, and a pace of disease that gave her almost no time to fight back. The video ends here. But the stories do not. Behind the glare of stage lights, behind money and adoration, there are bodies carrying secrets, infections, misdiagnoses, and slow-motion collapses that few people want to look at directly. So now the question turns to you. After hearing these stories of legends, pioneers, and everyday figures who seemed untouchable, what do you feel facing the blunt reality of how their lives ended? Do these endings change the way you see fame, risk, or your own sense of invincibility? Share your thoughts, fears, or reflections in the comments below. Honest conversations may not change the past, but they can change the choices someone makes tomorrow. If you know someone whose life or personality mirrors this story, share their name in the comments.